Oh, it broke. Huh. I was initially slightly disappointed at the announcement of the Vidar, because I already have one. Where's my Chimaris Vidar, or Flauros, or Full City, or Reganlays? Bandai, goddammit! But as soon as it came out, the kit proved me completely wrong. It looks so much better than the full mechanics. There was rumours of a master grade bale, which I was dreading because it's my least favourite design, which, to be fair, might also be because it's the only one of the full mechanics that I have unpainted and sitting plain and everything on my shelf. But still, that's kind of just the design, it is just plain white. But now, having gotten this master grade Vidar in hand, it's actually quite exciting to imagine how much better and more interesting they would make it. The most important and immediately obvious difference with this master grade, I can't actually really show you, but it's the difference in blues. The blue used on this now makes the full mechanics look so cheap in comparison. I remember now why I painted my full mechanics, because it was just not only inaccurate out of box, but didn't at all capture the feeling of the anime or Ippei Gyobu's art. The master grade, on the other hand, totally does. Even completely out of box and unmatte coated, which I was a little concerned about, it looks so much better. It definitely looks better matte coated, but they've done such a good job making it look good no matter what you do to it. I also wonder if they consider at all how the shade of plastic will look matte coated when picking the colour, because it is such a common and recommended thing to do, and it does so often change the colours. I wonder if that plays a part in their decision or not. The only thing about matte coating it is the black that Bandai uses. I really like it. It's immediately identifiable as black, but it isn't actually anywhere near as dark as a real black. So it looks much better on a shelf and the detail doesn't just get lost on it as much as if you paint something in black. Because I usually do avoid painting anything just black because of that. You can see the difference in the shade of the bare plastic on the master grade and the black I painted on the full mechanics. But when matte coating it, it does lighten up even more, which isn't ideal. The dark grey I painted on some pieces to colour separate them after the matte coat is just barely noticeable in comparison to the matte black. Of course, the quality of how the master grade looks goes so much beyond just the raw colour too. The detail is just so much better. I now want to say the Vidar was one of the worst full mechanics kits, and how it didn't even part separate the black on the shoulders and feet, even though it's such an important part of the original base design. The standard master grade motif of frame and darker colours being given extra places to poke through the armour is actually done quite sparingly here, likely because of just the overall lack of actual armour, and blue especially, used in the design. It's actually very surprising when you open the box and look through it all and see only kind of slightly less than even 2 runners of colour in comparison to the million runners of grey and black. But where they do have detail poking through works so well here, thanks to how it matches the existing similarly designed trenches on the shoulders and feet. Of course, a lot of that detail that you're seeing I've painted and separated and tried to bring out more on both of these too, and so I have a lot more than usual to say about the detail of the detail. The full mechanics I built and painted right when it first came out, while the show was still airing nearly 10 years ago, but I've been slightly unhappy with it since, as I've seen the original Vidar art and colour again and again over time. And because I feel like the red that I did ended up coming out as just way too much. So I wanted to do this MG very differently. The blue, like I said, is excellent out of box, so there's just no real need to repaint it this time. So the hard part was deciding what colours to use in place of all the red this time. The pistons in particular were difficult, because you do want them to stand out, but not so much that it ruins the Vidar's dark vibe and atmosphere. Usually it's just gold that I and many others use for these kinds of parts. But I've always felt that the brightness of a gold would definitely compromise the design's moodiness. So I went for using a pale gold sparingly this time, Tamiya TS87, and then I would primarily use a bronze. But once I actually started, the gold looked much better than I expected. And when I did a test fit to decide the last few colours, I wasn't a fan of the shoulder trapezius piston colours, and just how much the bronze stood out and overpowered them. So on those ones, I went back and redid it and swapped the placement of the two colours. It's a bit unfortunate because it doesn't quite work as well for the detail. While we're up here, it was also interesting to notice that the frame has the same power button detail as the Barbatoast's armour. I suppose just a leftover from it being the Barbatoast's frame. The main thing I was checking with the test fit though was the reactor colours. I usually do those bronze and was planning the same on this, but when I did the metallic red for these details on the sides, which you can see I've now just done silver, but just very quickly and sloppily and messily, because it turns out you can't actually even see them when armoured, so it was kind of a whole waste of time, but it worked out really well because the whole reactors in the candy red actually looked really cool. And so I wanted to see if it would be too much, just like I feel about my full mechanics, to leave them and do them in this candy red. But it turned out that the reactors are actually quite hidden by the armour, and so it was fine to do them in red. It doesn't quite contrast as well with the pink that I did for the centres of the reactors, but I did that mostly just so that it would match the backpack reactor, so I don't mind if it doesn't look perfect compositionally there. Below the reactors you can see some of the best detail that they've added to the sculpt. The pistons and centred spinal block look so good on the MG. The parts I've painted red on the centre poke through the front cover, so were easy to paint, except for the line below, which was more difficult. It would have been nice if they had that piece separate and poking through the front cover armour as well, just so that it matched the above detail and was easier to paint. But I was doing similar painting on the pistons anyway. The detail sculpted onto these pistons made deciding the colours for all of them across the whole kit so much easier, because it's these ones that are really the problem. They're so large and front and centre that if you paint the rest of the pistons to stand out, then these ones stand out too much, like you can see on the full mechanics. It's these pistons being red on the full mechanics that I think is really what makes me feel like the red is overdone with my paint job. The detail allowed me to completely avoid that by still having the bulk of the colour be gunmetal, and then just punching in the other colours onto those excellent detail. It's probably my favourite part of the finished build now, probably followed by the shoulders. The MG didn't just separate those black trenches, but also even detailed them further. It's easier to see on the feet ones, where the detail is just larger, that they added sort of cable lines going along them that then go into raised rectangles. And when I saw that, I knew I had to try and paint it, even knowing it was going to be a pain in the arse. And maybe not even possible. The easiest way probably would have been to do a reverse wash, I imagine, although they're so small that maybe not. But I don't have the enamel paints necessary for that anyway, and so, like always, I just did it by hand. I had a couple of backup plans in order to make it easier and more doable. I hoped to be able to scrape any paint that got into the lines off, and I was able to for the most part, with pointed tweezers that turned out to be just the right perfect thickness to get into those lines. And if need be, I could have also always just tried panel lining them in order to add back the black. And of course, worst case scenario, I could just respray them entirely back to black. so there wasn't actually much risk in trying. And I'm glad I did, because it actually wasn't as hard as I thought, thanks to them just being straight lines. The main difficulty is just seeing those lines. My other main concern was the red lightening them too much, because there's not actually that much black around those lines. And it is a very important part of the original design that those trenches are dark. So, in the end, I had to also paint the edges of the blue armour black, in order to maintain the overall darkness of the area. Also, during that test fit, I had decided to leave the underlying shoulder joint just bare plastic, just for some variation instead of it all being gunmetal. But after doing the test fit, I decided that it looked fine, but there just wasn't any other bare pieces of frame colour on the entire mobile suit, and so it was just a little odd to leave only these parts bare. So before painting the gold on top of them to match the parts separated hips, I just painted them gunmetal. I also used that test fit to think about and decide to paint some pink lining onto the armour panels, and I'm very glad I did, even though I wasn't initially very sure about it. I wasn't sure if it would be too much and stand out too much and look too odd in actual plastic form. But no, it looks great. I'm so glad I did, and it does actually translate quite well from the art to add pink onto this design. On the arms, I of course painted the pipes. The joints were very difficult to decide how to paint. They have that really nice added detail, the same that's on the reactor centres. So I thought about a lot of colour combinations for both of them that would match each other. But they're joints, not reactors, so they're matching detail but not matching purpose. And so I couldn't think of a great colour scheme that would really suit them both. And so in the end I decided to just do them differently, because it was also difficult because they don't match the other joints either. And those I definitely want to match because they're all joints, aren't they? So I eventually decided on silver with red backing. That mismatch between the designs of the joints, though, is now definitely one of my complaints with the kit. I wouldn't have thought about it so much if not for painting, but they really should just all have this extra detail. In comparison to the elbows, the other joints just look really plain and simple and exactly like the full mechanics. So they really should have just done this design on all of the joints. The hands have swappable fingers with an articulated thumb. Such a shame for me that this seems to be the standard now, because I've always just preferred the articulated style that you build, not the completely pre-molded on the runners style. They suck, but the ones that you actually build are great and I've always loved them. It just saves having to swap parts. They can just do whatever you need without you having to dig out a small separate piece from wherever you keep your accessories. Swappable fingers are especially bad for that. I'd actually prefer at least full swappable hands, just because it's very difficult to tell what kit just some small fingers in a bag, or however you keep your accessories, are for if things ever get mixed up. And you're ever not sure what kit they're supposed to go to, there's just no real way for you to tell. I especially don't like it on this kit because otherwise all of the accessories are storable on the mobile suit. The handguns can be stored in the front skirts, the rifle attached to the side skirts, the burst saber blades in those side skirts, and then you can just attach the handle to one of those blades and leave it on top of the side skirts. Only the fingers can't be stored. This kit doesn't even have beam saber blades or anything like that, obviously, that you have to worry about and store. In this instance though, I've painted them at least, so it'll always be obvious. I decided to spray them black and then paint the mechanics gunmetal, and paint what looked kinda like separate finger armour on top of them in a grey colour. Another reason swappable fingers are annoying here is because of the design of the handguard armour on this. The big overhang at the front that comes to a point makes it quite difficult to actually get your finger into the hands to remove the fingers. Very often, especially with the splayed out hands, I found it was actually the handguard removing and coming off rather than the fingers. I think I might have actually bent and slightly damaged the connection, the peg, for one of the handguards in doing so even. Although I don't know, because it has still been fine, it's not at all an issue, but still. It is good. You do want the fingers to attach into the hands tightly, but with this design it is a bit frustrating and just would have preferred non-swappable fingers. Or at least, like I always say, the option. Swappable fingers and articulated fingers would always be my, at least, ideal. The waist I mostly just did in such a way to match all of the other detail I did across the kit. I added some metallic red to the top because it was the colour I was using for all of the vents, and it looks kind of vent-y. I considered scribing a line there to properly make them vents, but honestly, I just couldn't be bothered for the sake of just one wee line, because nowhere else on the kit at all needs any scribing. It's all well done, just out of box as it is. Side skirts are huge, so I did more to them. The little canisters and the flaps, I managed to paint the lines inside of red. It was actually really easy, surprisingly. I had painted the innards silver anyway, so I just ran the side of the brush along the cables with clear red. I painted the black on the centre of the side skirts first without really thinking, and so that was going to have to get matte coated along with everything else. Same with the metallic black on the top of the side skirts. I had planned to go back over both of them to gloss them back up afterwards, but after matte coating it and then doing the other pieces in black, I thought it actually looked really good. Having those three central pieces of black be separated in some way, even if just in finish. And it worked out quite well that from top to bottom it was matte, gloss, matte, gloss. And so, to continue that on, I decided to then go over and matte coat the metallic black that I had painted on the bottoms of the side skirts, by masking the rest just with my hand. I also painted the rings around where the burst saber blades come out of in metallic black as well. Very, very late on, because I just hadn't thought about it at all until I had it all together and what I thought was completely finished, and realised, oh yeah, they would look good, painted as well. The edges of the side skirts also have some good detail on them, and it is the edge that is facing you head on, so I decided to separate and detail that up a little bit as well. There is this nice little mechanical detail that I knew I wanted to do in metallic, and then the little squares I knew I wanted to do in various greys. The seam line I decided to paint as well. I had a hard time deciding whether to do it in metallic black or gunmetal, but eventually landed on gunmetal after trying out metallic black and it just blending in too much. And then most of all, below those details, there is another kind of thruster sculpted in. And it looks basically the same as all of the other red thrusters surrounded by white, so I decided to paint it that way. And while I worried that it might stand out too much and look a little strange, the armour of the flappy piece covers it slightly and helps definitely avoid that, I think. I also did the same with the seam lines on the thighs as well, even though it's barely visible. I also ended up decaling the side skirts pretty much far more than anywhere else on the kit. And that's because, for whatever reason, they were one of the first pieces that I realised that the pink decals just really didn't stand out against the black on. But I had already put the ones that the instructions told you to put on the side skirts on them. And so I added additional white ones. I wanted those kinds of striping decals on it to be visible, so I added a white set of them at the top, and then that felt like it unbalanced it, so I added another set of them lower down, and then the small pink decal at the red thruster was basically invisible, so I wanted a white one there too, but the pink one was already there, so I eventually decided to put a white one even further down, and definitely couldn't resist once I had done more of the kit and realised that this white decal that I used is specifically for and says "Mind the Blast." And I'm glad I did end up putting more decals on it because it works well, it looks good. And after doing that, I decided to put some more extra decals across the whole thing, in some places too. Like on the biceps, for example, where there was a bear piece of detail that looked a little strange, and especially on the backpack and the binders, because the instructions don't tell you to put any decals on the insides of the binders, which I feel would just look strange. I painted the lines on the knees of the MG red. It was more difficult than I expected. I kind of expected it to be like some of the other lines I painted red on the kit. But unlike those other lines, the thickness and depth of these lines caused the issue of the paint running and going further down into them than I wanted. Came out okay though. I'm not a fan of the design of the knees above that. This big, flat, recessed piece just doesn't seem right out of box. I take it back, actually. This bit could actually do with some scribing, because it's just too large of a flat panel slightly separated from the rest of the piece that looks like it should be a different colour. You can see too that I left it with the original red on the thrusters and front skirts, because they've also just done a really good job with the shade of that. And I think it would have been too much again if I changed it to metallic. I used flat red in some other places across the mobile suit to try and tie it in to this bare red, but it's just not the right shade in comparison to the bare plastic. I'll need to see if I can find a paint matching the plastic, because I don't like mixing paint, because it's a pain in the arse if I ever need to touch it up or anything, to actually perfectly match the detail that I've done before, or especially if I forget to paint a tiny wee bit and then have to mix a whole load of paint again. It's just annoying. So I need to see if I can just find some paint that matches the out-of-box red, so that I can better match it across the whole kit. Also, on the thrusters, I painted the small little, I'm not quite sure what to call them, but notch kind of details that surround the end of them in gold. I thought about it for quite a long time while doing the rest of the kit, and wasn't sure about doing it. I thought it might look a bit daft and might stand out too much, and also that it would be a bit of a pain in the arse to do that many small details, but thankfully not. It was straightforward and easy enough to do. I didn't have too hard of a time of it, and it has, I feel, come out very subtle, and so I'm very glad that I did risk it. Then, on the calves, the detail poking through is gunmetal with the line in silver, which I generally kept consistent throughout the kit. And at the bottom, I did the lines in the two greys that I was using occasionally across the kit. The feet have little trenches sculpted into them, and so I decided to see what it would look like painting those in pink. And they then also have little raised spherical detail at the end of them, and so I tried to also paint that in red as well, even though it was a little bit difficult and I've not quite done it perfectly. It was worth a try, and it still looks quite good, I think. The feet knives are metallic black, just to make them that little bit different, and because it makes sense for them, to me in my head, to be metallic. Surprisingly, the bottom of the feet actually look really good with all the separation on the MG too, which is great, because with the Hunter's Edge, you can actually see the bottom of the feet if you pose the Vidar using them, so it's great that they do actually look still really good out of box. For the kit's other weapons, there's the burst saber, which there's not a lot to do to, just painted the blades silver. But the pistols and rifle I'm actually really happy with. I usually find weapons quite difficult because they need a whole load of different colours, but the Vidar itself is so dark that I was able to tie the weapons into it and have them match. The pistols don't make sense to have wood handles, but same as on the full mechanics, I just can't resist. It looks too good. They also have a gimmick that lets you pull the top back, but they're still actually extremely simple in construction, just two pieces sandwiched together with that piece put on top. Honestly, they really should have been more like the rifle and had a centre piece that could poke through. It would look much nicer out of box if the lines on the sides that I've painted silver were separated by default, and would definitely be doable and wouldn't break the bank. They could even stick them on the already silver-plated runner and actually make them silver. Although that would limit reuse, so it would be fair enough if they didn't do that, but still. That centrepiece for the rifle is darker than the surrounding gun out of box, but I swapped it and painted the whole centrepiece silver instead, and then painted the little lines red instead as well. And the rifle at least is slightly more involved. It's still only something like 6 pieces, but it does have a clear piece for the scope. You don't have to use any stickers, they're all optional, like eye stickers or for the cockpit, which I just used. It's a complete waste of time to paint that detail on the cockpit because it's impossible to see anyway. I do find the cockpit quite disappointing on this kit. I never realised that the Vidar's cockpit couldn't open at the front like the Barbatoast. I'm assuming that at least, based on this kit, because that'd be the only valid reason for not having it open like that. It would make sense for the Vidar, with it being a disguise. It wouldn't be refined and honed and comfortable in that way. Like a supercar, it has different priorities, besides how easy it is to get into. But even so, the cockpit hatch could slide further forward, or be on a separate joint that would allow it to raise up, kind of like the Asgard that I reviewed has, for example. Or they could have just designed the cockpit to open at the front like the Barbatoast's. Anyway, it feels like a lot of the time cockpits are only included because they're a traditional requirement for Master Grade, but they don't care about them. And if they had their way nowadays, they just wouldn't bother. Which I think is a real shame, especially with the rise of third-party Master Grade style kits, and how none of them do cockpits and pilot figures. It could be a good unique selling point for Bandai to focus on again. Anyway, the sticker for the backpack is probably the most mandatory one, just to make sure it properly pops out of box. Even mine, where I painted the underlayer silver, would probably still look better with the sticker. The eyes are clear pieces though, which a lot of people like. I usually prefer the stickers, and I might still put them on after the review, but I thought I'd show you how easy it can be to work with LEDs first, seeing as I've been taking my time and doing a full painted review anyway. You can just buy a pre-wired SMD micro LED, a 3-volt battery and battery holder for it, or whatever the LED says it takes, and then have a look at the head, see if it fits, cut away anything that gets in the way, glue it in place, which I'm not going to do here because I don't plan to actually keep the LED in it. These battery holders have a built-in switch, so there's no need to put one in between, so you can just solder the LED's wires to the battery holder's wires. Just make sure to match red to red and black to black, which is a bit of a problem with these clear ones because the wires are also clear, so you have to just test which is red and black. So, yeah, maybe just don't get clear ones like this, because they're a little bit annoying because of that. Honestly, don't be intimidated, just try shit. It's actually very easy and simple to solder wires. I'm crap at it, but you can still just do it. It's not actually difficult. I'm glad that I got into model kits as a teenager with spaceships and everything, and just had the teenage confidence and lack of self-doubt to just try it and just do a load of stuff. Badly, but still. Who cares? I still have some nice lit up ships, even if they're not really as good as they should be. And the wires inside are a damn mess. So just give stuff a go. For the build, the runners are boxed in a good order, except for B, kind of. I also didn't actually even need to think about how quickly I was finishing a runner like I usually do. It actually takes a very long time for you to finish a runner completely, but it wasn't a problem for me while building it because there's very little management of the runners anyway. You're just using the same set of runners the whole time near enough, meaning you only really have to find the runners pretty much once. This is also in large part because I was doing the armour completely separately too, but it was also the same with that armour when I came to do it too, so I feel comfortable praising the kit for it. And building the frame entirely first is definitely the way to go. Just like with the Asgard, it makes it feel so much more zippy and stops it ever taking too long before you have the satisfaction of finishing something. And then you get to briefly see all of that inner frame in detail. Also because the kit, despite having some spare parts, also is well designed so that it doesn't really have too many runners. The chest was actually very involved. It takes quite a long time to build even just the frame of. Even when reassembling it after painting it and everything, it's noticeably the slowest part. I actually found the build on this a bit of a pain in places. and maybe not quite up to what I expect of Bandai. The pistons were just difficult to read in the instructions where exactly you need to insert them. Some of them just go into a hole in the piece that is surrounded by several other holes. And you're like, well, is it this hole? Is it that hole? And you kind of have to struggle to actually see what hole it's meaning on the instructions and kind of just, to some degree, intuit where they go. The waist pistons also attach onto it loosely. They seem tighter once the front is put on, but they're still not great, and it's still annoying to hold them in place until then. The pistons on the sides of the chest and the ball joints for the backpack binders are also slightly similar and not ideal. The shoulder armour pretty much needs the top piece put on last, but the instructions don't actually say that at all for some reason, which is very strange because I'm sure I remember noticing quite often pieces and assemblies being ordered and given numbers with the order that you need to put the parts together in, quite often even when you don't actually really need them at all. So it's quite strange and surprising to come across a piece that could actually kind of do with it and doesn't give you an order to put the parts together in. The armour on the front of the arms also doesn't want to stay on until all of the armour is on and locks it together, which was a bit of a pain for me and annoying. The back piece I also found quite difficult to put on. My advice is put it on straight and then angle it, rather than trying to put it on just how you expect it to go on. The frame for the toes can be slightly difficult to get completely closed if you have it out of position at all. Just angle the toe down when you're doing it to make sure that nothing collides and that you can completely close them. The backpack armour was also difficult to get to close around the centre of the backpack. It just took a weird amount of force and finagling for a Bandai kit. For the thrusters, I was surprised to see that the frame doesn't actually poke through the centre of them. I just kind of completely took that for a given until I actually did them. A bit of a missed opportunity. I painted the piece that they attach onto and the peg of it, expecting it to poke through and be the centre nozzle of the thrusters. But no, instead it's just all one thruster piece, and I can't really colour separate that without it being quite annoying. For a little while, the proportions also looked slightly strange to me, until I realised it was just that the hip joints were extended. Be a little careful about that, because that drop down is slightly loose in comparison to the hips themselves, and so very often when you go to move the legs, that drop down joint will move either instead or at least as well as whatever movement you're also doing, and so has a habit of working itself down and extending the legs when you don't plan to and don't even realise that it's doing it. This is future me coming in with the reason that the drop down hips are much worse than I thought, and that's because they broke. I was recording the footage of the detail on the bottom of the feet, and afterwards I suddenly noticed that that left leg just could not stay up at all and was completely floppy, and when I went and had a look at it, you can hopefully see that it had a little white line going across the ring inside the hip, because it had just split. This was actually really early into filming too. I hadn't even really done anything yet. Kicking the leg up like that to show the bottom of the foot was really the first thing that I had done with the hips. I hadn't done any of the posing or anything like that. The only thing I had done was film the articulation before completely finishing painting, and that was also before the only other thing I did, which was letting some paint get into that hip joint. But I don't think that's fair to cause it to break, because painting a joint is the most common way of tightening a joint, and this joint does need tightened, but it just broke. I'm not going to hold it against it too much because I haven't heard of anyone else's breaking, and if it was really common I would have expected to have heard about it being an issue for the Barbatoast as well at some point. But it definitely does make the looseness of the drop down hips more of an issue, because I can't really safely recommend tightening it, or it might just break with even just some extra paint in it like this. And once it is broken, it's only worse. I tried supergluing it just to get through the rest of the filming that I needed, but it just immediately split again, just when putting it back onto the peg. I was only really luckily able to get through the rest of the recording and posing by using one of the action-based connectors that just goes in and around the hips, which helped hold the drop-down hip up and stop it from dropping down and flopping about again now that it's broken. So at least if yours does also end up breaking, you can try putting one of those action-based connectors onto it as well. Overall though, the proportions are much better in every way than the full mechanics. Even regardless, even if you do have the hips extended, it's hard to even really put into words just how much better. I have to just hope that you can see it. It's night and day, it's so much better. The MG overall is actually slightly larger as well. Unfortunately, as pretty much always with Bandai kits, honestly, the nubs aren't great. There's also some bad placement, like on the backpack. Why put a big one on the centre there, right at the front, and not two on the sides where they would be invisible? I usually don't talk about nub placement much, because I don't know the engineering decisions for making the moulds for the runners, and where you kind of just have to put a nub. So as much as I quite often think, this nub doesn't seem like it should be here, I don't say it, but definitely on this part, I can't imagine a reason for it being where it is. It should be on the sides. There are some good nub placement across the kit. There are a lot of pieces that have the edges go under other pieces, like the other side of this backpack piece even, that then have completely hidden nubs because they're just under another piece. But honestly, even still, Bandai needs to just get their head out their arse and start undergating everything. It's always such a stark difference going from a third-party kit nowadays, which can undergate too much, if anything, that it's slightly annoying, back to a Bandai kit, which just don't bother at all. And the fitment issues of third-party kits just generally aren't there anymore to make up for it. Nowadays, I'm honestly having to do more sanding on Bandai kits because they actually still have nubs to clean than I am on third-party kits because a peg is a bit tight or whatever. And the build experience for this wasn't even that smooth. The instructions were still not fully clear in places, and I had to strain to see parts like some of those piston peg holes, and I still had to put pressure on and get my fingers a bit uncomfortable in parts because of some, not so much tight parts, but poor design, like the waist skirts or backpack armour or the chest reactor assembly. It still didn't feel very Bandai to be having those kinds of difficulties. Stickers are also just completely ridiculous in this day and age, because nowadays every kit basically feels like a Verka kit. We only get, at best, a couple of master grades per year. What's the excuse now for hoarding water slides for Verkas? There are no simple or filler or just everyday routine master grade releases now. So I can't excuse everyday routine stickers at all anymore really either. Water slides cost pennies. Just throw them in addition to the stickers. At very least, don't wait months to officially release and sell water slides for it separately. That makes no sense even from a business perspective, because a lot of people have already built the damn kit by then, or, like me, just went and bought water slides from a third-party online seller, which I then had to wait weeks on arriving, and massively delayed this video even further. And still, they're the only saving grace. When those third-party water slides aren't there, and available at the time that you're actually building the kits, it's extremely annoying and frustrating, like I'm currently experiencing with the Psycho Gundam Mark II. I really want to decal it, and detail it, and paint it, and matte coat it, and everything, but there just aren't any water slides for it yet. Anyway, speaking of the Psycho Mark II, just for fun, here's the Vidar next to it. The Vidar is a really good size. Like I said, it has been just overall sized up from the full mechanics slightly, and it lands pretty much in the sweet spot for size in my opinion. It might be overscale though, because it is bigger than the full mechanics, and it is only supposed to be 18.5 meters, according to the manual and everything I see online, but it looks much more bigger than that next to the Ariel and the Grandaddy RX Gundam. Still, I'm okay with it. Like I said, this feels like the sweet spot for size. The aerial, when I first finished it, felt just kind of small. I was kind of shocked by it when I actually got it finished. I hope the eventual MG for the aerial also beefs it up a bit. For articulation, the head can look up a good amount, look down as well. Good tilt side to side. Do be careful though, because the neck attachment into the body is not very secure. The entire neck and head comes off actually very easily and quite frequently. That's another issue I should have mentioned in my fucking huge rant there. I painted it to try and tighten it, but the design itself is still just not ideal. Arms can raise way past the 90, no issue at all. Hinge forward and come across the chest a good amount. The way that shoulder armour is attached, it's attached to the arm, so it's unfortunately not separate at all. So when you're raising the arms, it also raises exactly the same amount. You can't adjust it separately, which is quite annoying. I always appreciate the ability that we usually have to raise the arms a little bit and then tilt the shoulder armour forward so that it's still facing forward and looks right and you're not just looking up into the bottom of it. Unfortunately, you can't do that on this, which I really don't like. Bicep swivel too. The elbow bend is good, but I did find it limiting me when posing and trying to have it hold the guns straight up and close to the body. I would really have appreciated it if the elbows and arms could bend all of the way fully, but I know that is a lot to ask for, and it does have cool mechanics and pistons at the back. Wrists are actually pretty excellent. Great full range in and out, and then can fully hinge down in order to use the burst saber, but they don't get any movement up, which can be a slight issue for the pistols, and it stopped me making up for the elbow range in that one pose because I couldn't then have the wrists move just slightly up in order to straighten out the guns. So it's minor, but I did notice its absence. And then, like I said, that thumb is also articulated. Waist gets a decent amount forward and backward. Decent, but not as much as you might hope for with the design side to side. Rotation there at the bottom as well. The side skirts are attached on both a ball joint and a peg. It can be slightly annoying at times to position them and get the joint that you actually want to rotate when you're moving them forward and back, say. But they work really well. They raise up to the sides a good amount and don't get in the way of the legs being able to do the full splits. The drop down at the hips also allows the legs to go in a good amount as well for easier and more effective walking and flight poses. You can get the legs to cross a lot and the feet to actually go really far away from each other. Legs go 90 degrees forward before you would have to start kicking them out to get them around the front skirts. Back slightly less because of the thruster rather than the back skirt. Knees are also excellent and get full range even with the big thick thruster and everything assembly that's on the back here. Ankles are also very effective. Feet go a very good amount forward and back and get plenty of pivot as well as having that toe joint in the front. Oh, and then lastly, the binders on the back are also on double ball joints that also kind of function like a slip joint, because as you move them, the joint pulls out and affords more range, which is good but can be slightly annoying as quite often to get it into the position you want, you'll have to then push them back in afterwards. But that's fine, it's worth it for the extra range and mobility. Overall, the Vidar looks fantastic and is a great kit. The kind of aesthetic improvement that you can't really even imagine until it comes out and makes what you were happy with just completely obsolete. And so, like I said at the start, I'm now majorly looking forward to future IBO releases, even if it's one I already have, even though I would prefer the suits that haven't been made at all yet. Like, God, please give me the Chimaris Vidar Bandai, it looks so good. But at the same time, I'm also a bit concerned. This Barbatoast frame just isn't great, really. The hips are just that little bit loose and floppy. The stability overall on this kit isn't the best. It's good enough, but it's not one I would really want to do the shake test on, and has all of these minor assembly little issues and niggles. and just comes apart quite easily. Like I said, the neck comes off when you try and move the head, the shoulders can pop off when you're moving them, and the arms and everything, because they're just attached on one little peg, as well as that attachment making them completely joined to the arms so that you can't move them independently of the arms when you raise them in order to adjust it and make it just look that bit nicer. I've no idea why Bandai waited 6 years to try and reuse this frame again, when it's meant that, in my opinion, they've kind of just missed the boat on when I really am okay with them actually reusing it. I would now just much prefer a new frame. And now also, as third-party releases make up the majority of releases in this scale and style, Bandai could do with getting their finger out and making these small, consistent improvements that would allow them to stay far ahead of the competition and maintain their dominance. Just add water slides and undergate everything as standard. When building a Bandai kit, I shouldn't have to sand anything. Their brand and advantage is accessibility. So just undergate and delete sanding entirely from the casual builder's repertoire. Like I said earlier, I'd also say to perhaps put more focus on the cockpits and scale figures, and where it even slightly makes sense, perhaps include multiple figures per kit. Make the cockpits easier to open and get into and see as well, so that they will be more popular and appreciated by the people building them, just because it is something that third party doesn't do and probably never will. But in all honesty, in the end, I don't think Bandai is at all competing with third party kits, and at all has to. That's actually just kind of the way things go in all corners of the collectible sphere. Like, for example, you can see it with third-party Transformers and everything. It turns out that they just aren't actually competing. People just kind of buy both. And even the ones that don't are massively eclipsed by the people who are just casual, just walk into a shop or whatever and buy whatever they see and come across and don't even know about third party. That is great. That's what allows us to get third party everything through all corners of the collectible sphere, like I said, without everything always getting shut down by licensors. But it is also a little disappointing that there's no real way of forcing and indicating to the large companies that actually own the licenses and make the majority of product that we want them to make these improvements, and that it would be successful for them to do so. If you got through this whole ungodly long video, thank you so much. You should honestly just definitely subscribe at this point. What are you doing? You've listened to this for fuck knows how long at this point. Like, just subscribe. I'll be reviewing the Barbatoast Lupus MG when it comes out, and before then I would also quite like to do a video reviewing every full mechanics or no grade for Season 1 suits Iron Blooded Orphans kit, because I already basically have them all, and the majority are painted and look kind of cool and I would like to show anyway, so subscribe. Again, thank you so much for watching. Until hopefully next time, bye.